Welcome to the deep dive. We're here again to process some pretty complex knowledge and research, trying to distill the core insights, really, so you, the listener, get a solid understanding of what matters most.
Mhm.
Today, we're diving deep into the architecture of human potential. It's all laid out in this technical research book, The Foundations of Angel Wing, volume #1.
That's right. And our focus today is really extracting let's say, the essential mechanics of self-mastery of identity and the kind of structured path towards what this material calls biopsychospiritual evolution.
Okay, biopsychospiritual evolution. We'll definitely need to unpack that one.
Absolutely. Think of this whole thing as receiving a kind of blueprint for transformation. It's
Yeah.
meant to accelerate your understanding of the framework that's presented in this volume.
Right. Now, before we really get into unpacking this framework, we absolutely want to start by acknowledging the dedicated people whose work actually made this research and this whole structure possible.
Yes, definitely. So our deepest gratitude goes first to Dr. Chaitanya Kripalu, who is the founder and CEO of the Angel Wing, LLC.
And we also absolutely want to extend our thanks to Dr. Elizabeth Berman. She's a valued member of Angel Wing's mastermind group and apparently a very passionate presenter of this material.
hmm And finally, a really major acknowledgement has to go to Sachin J. Karnik. He's the researcher who meticulously performed all the background work, the compilation for Foundations of Angel Wing Volume #1.
It sounds like a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the material they produced, well, is presented as a really comprehensive, very structured approach to personal transformation. It's not about quick fixes,
Quick fixes, right.
Not at all. It's
Sure.
more like a detailed map for unlocking deep human potential. It's about guiding the individual toward, well, higher states of consciousness and, importantly, sustained well-being. So, yeah, let's jump in.
Okay, let's do it. So section I, let's ground ourselves first in the ultimate objective described in the volume. What's the overarching mission here? What's this framework actually promising people who engage with it?
Well, the mission is defined pretty ambitiously, actually. It's about nurturing human evolution. That's the term they use.
Nurturing human evolution. Okay.
Yeah. And it aims to facilitate a very specific kind of transition, moving a person from, let's say, basic, often reactive self-awareness, which is, common for most of us.
Right, the default mode.
Exactly, the default mode. Moving from that toward a state of really profound self-mastery. And the underlying goal, it seems, is always collective. It's
Yeah.
about fostering personal transformation as a way to ultimately uplift humanity as a whole.
Okay, so it's individual work, but with a bigger picture in mind. It sounds like they're trying to build a system where, the parts all work together seamlessly, rather than just handing out like a list of disconnected tools or techniques.
That's absolutely crucial to the philosophy here. The book really emphasizes a holistic structure. It states clearly that the programs are designed as a, quote, harmonious interconnected mechanism.
Harmonious mechanism.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
all the components,
Yeah.
the psychological, the energetic, the physical, they're all meant to interlink. And together, they generate what the book calls a profound state of well-being. That means it's comprehensive, touching every layer of your existence.
So it's setting the groundwork not just for like mental clarity, but for something bigger. They use the word ascension.
They do.
Yeah.
And it implies mental, emotional, and spiritual evolution all happening in lockstep together.
Okay. And the outcome they're suggesting, it sounds like it's about unleashing inherent potential, regardless of where someone's starting from. That feels like a pretty bold claim.
It is bold. The promise is that individuals can activate their innate healing and energetic potentials, irrespective of whatever challenges they currently face. Could be physical discomfort, mental blocks, emotional trauma. The material basically posits that these potentials are intrinsic. They're already inside us. The structure, the framework, merely provides the method, the how-to access and deploy them effectively.
Okay. Which brings us neatly to this core concept anchoring the whole mission. Biopsychospiritual evolution. You mentioned it earlier. We definitely need to spend some time really defining what that holistic evolution looks like in practice.
Right. So the concept itself refers to a complete metamorphosis. That's the word they favor. A profound change that encompasses every dimension of being.
Every dimension. So break that down, biopsychospiritual.
Okay. So bio refers to the physical system,
Yeah.
the body, the energy flowing through it, its structure, its health. Psycho addresses the mental and emotional processing of reality, your inner landscape, your thoughts, your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And spiritual points toward the relationship with one's essential self, the core being,
Yeah.
and its connection to the cosmos, the bigger picture.
Got it. So it's not just therapy, and it's definitely not just like physical training or diet. It's a synthesis of all three.
Exactly. It's a synthesis. And when these three elements evolve simultaneously, together, the text suggests it leads directly to the manifestation of innate abilities, things like previously unrealized energetic functions, or maybe intuitive capacities. It's evolution across all planes, making sure the body and mind are, let's say, sophisticated enough to handle the expansion of consciousness that they're aiming for.
That's a fascinating idea, the body and mind needing to be upgraded to handle the consciousness shift.
Precisely. It implies a necessary coherence between all levels.
Now, to make that kind of radical transformation feel more relatable, I noticed the book uses a couple of really compelling metaphors. First, there's the bird.
Ah, yes, the bird.
Yeah.
That metaphor is all about necessary harmony. The text explains that to achieve great heights, spiritually speaking, to truly soar, all components, the mind, the body, the spirit, they must function in absolute balance.
Like the wings of the bird needing to work together.
Exactly. If the psycho aspect, let's call it the wing of the mind, is burdened by trauma or limiting beliefs, or if the bio aspect, the wing of the body, is neglected and unhealthy, then the flight path is compromised. You can't reach those hikes.
Okay, that makes sense. It justifies their comprehensive approach, right? Highlighting that link between mind, body, brain function.
It does. It underscores why you can't just focus on one area in isolation if you're aiming for this kind of total evolution.
And the second metaphor, the butterfly, seems to focus more on maybe the inevitability or the nature of the process itself.
Yes, the butterfly is perfect for encapsulating the required transformation because it is metamorphosis. It symbolizes that profound change from a constrained state, the caterpillar, focused mostly on just consuming, crawling along.
Right, very limited.
Very limited, to a liberated soaring state, the butterfly. And the material argues that this profound change isn't just some lucky accident or a fluke. It's presented as the inherent natural progression, almost the destiny of the human spirit.
Destiny, wow.
Yeah. It represents the realization of that latent biopsychospiritual potential we were just talking about. It's waiting to unfold.
Okay. So we established the grand mission, this holistic evolution, achieving self-mastery. But as the text seems to pivot quite quickly, you can't really start optimizing something until you actually know what that something is, which leads us right into the foundational inquiry. What is the self?
Exactly. And this is where the material really starts to build its core structure.
Yeah.
The inquiry, who am I? It's presented not just as some philosophical question to bat around.
Not just navel-gazing.
Not at all. It's framed as the oldest, the most persistent, and arguably the most necessary of all human questions.
Yeah, the volume is pretty strong on this point. It asserts that clarity on this question is the prerequisite for basically everything else. Without a firm understanding of the self, all knowledge feels fragmented. Any efforts towards self-improvement might be misdirected. Even our relationships just end up mirroring our own internal confusion. Things like meaning, morality, true consciousness, they all rest on this foundation of knowing the self.
Absolutely. And to help contextualize this search, the book provides a really concise but helpful historical synthesis. It contrasts two major interpretations of identity that have shaped how we think about this.
Okay, contrast in views. Let's start with the ancient perspective, maybe the Eastern wisdom tradition.
Right. So we look towards the Vedantic tradition from India. In this view, the self is identified as Atman. Now, to explain what that means in this context, Atman is understood as pure consciousness. It's seen as eternal, unchanging.
Unchanging, that's key.
Crucial. And it's considered fundamentally distinct from all the temporary aspects we usually identify with. The physical body, the constantly fluctuating mind, our passing emotions. Atman is the witness behind all that.
Okay. And the pinnacle statement, the kind of core realization in that tradition, the text mentions Tat Tamamas.
Yes. Krat Tivamasi. The usual translation is that thou art. It's this profound declaration that the core essence of the individual, the Atman, isn't separate or isolated. It's fundamentally the same essence as the cosmos, as the universal consciousness, Brahman.
So the individual self is the universal self, boundless, unchanging.
In essence, yes. That's the realization pointed to. The self is universal, boundless, and fundamentally unchanging.
Okay, now let's contrast that with the Western philosophical tradition, which has obviously defined our reality in many ways for centuries.
Right. And that approach finds perhaps its sharpest, most influential definition with René Descartes. He anchored selfhood firmly in the function of thinking.
The famous line.
Cogito ergo sum, which translates to I think, therefore I am. My existence is proven by the fact that I am thinking.
Yeah. And the limitation kind of leaps out immediately when you put the two side by side, doesn't it?
It really does.
One identifies the self as this silent, eternal background in which everything happens. The other identifies the self with the happening itself, the thought.
Precisely. The Cartesian view, while absolutely critical for developing rational inquiry in science, does tend to confine the self strictly within the mental domain. It makes thinking, which is a constantly changing temporary phenomenon, the very root of being.
Right.
And the angel wing material insists that real self-mastery requires moving past these kinds of fragmented functional definitions of who we are.
Okay. And this movement, this shift, is made possible by a really crucial conceptual distinction they introduce right here. The difference between the capitalized self and the lowercase self concept. This distinction is framed as like the actual beginning of real self-knowledge.
Yes, this is fundamental to their whole framework, the
Okay.
capitalized self. Think of it as the subject, into the unconditioned awareness itself.
Unconditioned meaning.
Meaning it's not dependent on anything else for its existence.
Yeah.
It's not born, it doesn't die, it's not defined by qualities. Picture it as the silent witness, the eternal observer that remains completely unchanged while watching all the phenomena, thoughts, sensations, emotions just pass through the field of awareness.
Like the screen on which the movie plays.
Exactly like the screen. And the material makes it really clear. This self cannot be objectified. You can't see it or define it as an object because it is the very presence in which all seeing and defining happen. It's the awareness itself.
Okay, clear. So that's the big S self. Now the lowercase S self, that's more like the avatar we use to navigate the world, the one we introduce at a party or put on a resume.
Precisely. The lowercase self, or the self-concept, or identity as they sometimes call it, that's the psychological construct. It's the composite identity we build over time. It's a collection of memories, the social roles we play, parent, employee, friend, the attributes we claim, I'm smart, I'm anxious, and the personal stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, our name, profession, preferences, gender identity, all of it.
And the key feature of this lowercase self, the volume notes, is its inherent dependency, right? It's always changing, it's dynamic, and it's strictly reliant on external reference points to even feel real. It's defined by context.
Absolutely. It needs those reference points. It is the transient object, the reflection in the mirror. The capitalized self is the eternal subject, the pure awareness looking out. And the entire success of this evolutionary journey, according to the book, hinges completely on recognizing this difference and, crucially, choosing where you place your sense of identity.
Choosing where you anchor your identity. Okay, that sets up the next big question then. If we are fundamentally this unconditioned self, this pure, stable awareness, how on earth do we become so profoundly lost in the self-concept? How does this fragile lowercase me narrative come to dominate our entire experience?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The material traces the formation of this self-concept, this narrative me, back to early life. It describes it as a gradual formation of the personal narrative. It starts, as an infant begins to distinguish itself from its environment, from the mother.
A sense of separation.
Yes, the initial sense of separation. And then this narrative gets constructed piece by piece through things like parental mirroring, how we are reflected back to ourselves by our caregivers.
Seeing ourselves in their eyes, basically.
Exactly. Then through the acquisition of language, which gives us labels for ourselves and our experiences. And then through constant social feedback throughout life, we learn who we are supposed to be through external validation, comparison, and repetition.
So the narrative itself isn't bad. It's essential for functioning in the world. But the tragedy lies in how it sort of captures our identity, hijacks it.
That's a good way to put it. The tragedy, as the text describes it, is profound. The deeper we identify with this specific, localized, constantly changing narrative, the more completely we forget the silent witness, the self, who is actually observing the story unfold.
Ah.
It's the great misidentification. Mistaking the changing contents of experience, the story, the thoughts, the feelings, for the unchanging reality, the awareness, the self.
The volume uses a specific term for this, the fall into identification. And it's careful to point out this isn't meant in a moral sense, like a religious fall from grace.
Oh, not at all.
But more like a cognitive and existential error, a mistake in perception.
Exactly. It's a perceptual entanglement.
Yeah.
Consciousness becomes completely absorbed in the contents of experience, those specific thoughts that feel so real, the fleeting emotions that seem overwhelming, the intense physical sensations.
Right.
And it forgets its own nature as the boundless space in which those contents are appearing. The observer gets tangled up with what it's observing. It stops being the screen and believes it is the movie playing on it.
That's a powerful analogy. And this entanglement, this misidentification, immediately generates what we commonly call the ego. Now, the book seems to suggest the ego is necessary for function, but when it's mistaken for the whole self, that's where the problems start. Let's delve into that, the ego's function and the definition given in the text.
Okay, so the ego is defined here as that localized sense of self that claims ownership over actions and experiences. Its language is inherently possessive. I think this, I feel that, I'm doing this.
The eye maker.
The eye maker, exactly. Now, in its correct place, the ego is presented as an indispensable instrument for functioning in the world. It helps us make decisions, set goals, navigate physical reality, interact with others. It gives us a point of reference.
We need it to operate.
We absolutely need it to operate in this dimension. The moment, however, and this is the crucial part, the moment that this functional ego is mistaken for the totality of one's being, for the capital S self,
Ah.
it instantly becomes the primary source of limitation, conflict, and ultimately psychological suffering.
Okay, but wait a second. This raises a practical question for me. If the ego is this localized sense of self that allows us to function, how can we truly transcend it, as these kinds of teachings often suggest? Isn't the ability to, say, write a complex research book like Foundations of Angel Wing, or even for us to sit here and host this deep dive, isn't that an act of a sophisticated functional ego? Where exactly is the line between necessary function and the source of suffering?
That's a really crucial point, and the material does address it, perhaps implicitly sometimes, by differentiating the ego as an instrument from the ego as an identity.
Instrument versus identity, okay.
Yes. The sophisticated tasks you mentioned, writing, analyzing, discussing, they absolutely require a localized instrument, the functional ego, to organize thoughts, structure arguments, and execute the actions. That's its job.
Right.
But the suffering arises when our identity completely fuses with that instrument.
Mm-hmm.
When the failure of the task, say, a negative review of the book, feels like I am a failure. When success feels like I am superior.
Ah, so it's when the tool believes it's the user.
Precisely. When the functional ego gets mistaken for or usurps the place of the capitalized self, that's when it transforms into what the text might imply is the false self.
The false self. Okay, let's talk about that. How does that localized, often insecure self-concept operate, particularly in our modern world?
Well, the false self, by its very nature, is an inherently comparative entity. It operates through comparison. It desperately craves validation from the outside and needs differentiation to feel solid.
The differentiation.
Meaning its core mechanism for feeling real is definition by contrast. I am smarter than him, I have more than her, I am more spiritual than they are, therefore I am me. It needs external opposition, or at least comparison, and constant approval and recognition to feel secure. Without that external input, it feels, well, threatened. Like a house of cards built entirely on external perception.
You can see this playing out nonstop, especially with social media, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
Where the focus is almost entirely on performance, image, external validation.
Absolutely. It's a perfect amplifier for the false self. And the material notes that the modern mind, perhaps more than ever, has become highly conditioned to equate existence with constant productivity and external output.
Busyness as identity.
Exactly. This is where selfhood gets tragically reduced purely to function. If I'm not doing something visible, achieving something measurable, I feel like I am nothing. One's inherent worth gets measured almost exclusively by accomplishments, by status symbols, by the external image projected. The false self ensures that the individual operates perpetually as a performance or a mask. The identity becomes the job title, the bank balance, the number of likes.
That really is a profound tragedy, isn't it? Forgetting the simple, profound okayness of just being in this frantic, often exhausting struggle to constantly become something else or do something more.
It is. Because the core tragedy highlighted here is recognizing that the true identity, the self, is already complete. It's already whole. It cannot be attained through striving or doing. It can only be recognized through stillness and awareness.
Right.
And this identity crisis where we confuse our changing performance for our unchanging being, the volume asserts very clearly, is the direct root cause of essentially all psychological pain. Every form of psychological suffering arises from believing ourselves to be what we are fundamentally not. It's consciousness believing it is the fleeting reflection in the mirror, rather than the mirror itself.
Believing it's the reflection, not the mirror. Okay. So, if the core problem is this deep identification with the narrative, with the reflection, then the solution, the path to mastery, must involve a deep recognition of the reality, of the mirror itself. How does the text define this path? It seems to move us away from trying to control all the internal content, right?
Absolutely. The framework proposed here shifts the entire locus of control, you could say. Mastery in this specific context is not achieved by trying to wrestle with the contents of the mind,
Yeah.
trying to suppress a negative thought or force yourself to feel a positive emotion. That's often a losing battle.
Yeah, it usually is.
Instead, mastery comes from recognizing, stabilizing, and ultimately resting in the one who is aware of those contents. The focus moves entirely from the constantly shifting object, the thought, the feeling, to the stable, unchanging subject, the knower, the awareness itself.
So the idea is that the true self, the witness, it doesn't react in the same way. It simply observes.
Exactly. That stabilized witnessing awareness is presented as the seat of inner freedom and the engine of transformation. It's stable because it exists prior to the mind and body, prior to the experiences. It is, according to this material, the only part of human experience that is inherently unchanging, regardless of external circumstances or internal states. And this is where the real work of finding stability happens.
Okay, so what are the practical steps then? If someone listening wants to engage in this self-inquiry, what does this observation practice actually look like day to day?
Well, in practice, it's described as a kind of non-interfering observation. It requires discipline, yes, but it's more of a passive discipline, if that makes sense.
Passive discipline, explain that.
It means you actively choose to watch, but you don't interfere with what you're watching. You watch thoughts arise and then subside on their own. You watch emotions come and eventually go. You notice sensations appear and dissolve. And the key is doing this without judging them, without labeling them good or bad, and crucially, without trying to interfere with their natural flow.
So just noticing.
Just noticing.
Yeah.
It's a disciplined, internal observation of the transient contents of the mind. You are simply noting, maybe internally, there's fear present, not, oh no, I am fearful. It creates that subtle but crucial distance.
Okay. And this sustained practice, this consistent noticing, eventually leads to a key realization, a specific kind of insight, which the book refers to using the Sanskrit term viveka. What is viveka?
Viveka is critical here. It translates generally as discernment or discrimination. It's the process or the insight that gradually dawns through that practice of observation. And the insight is this: everything that can be observed cannot possibly be the observer.
Okay, say that again. Everything that can be observed.
Cannot possibly be the observer. If you can hear a sound, you are not the sound itself. You are the listener. If you can know a thought, see it arise in your mind, you cannot be that thought. You are the knower of the thought.
Right. Because you're aware of it.
Exactly. Since thoughts are known, they cannot be the knower. Since feelings are experienced, they cannot be the experiencer. This dawning of viveka, this discernment, establishes a clear, uncrossable boundary, in a sense, between the awareness itself and all of its changing contents.
That feels like a kind of psychological triage, doesn't it? Separating the signal, the awareness from the noise, the content. It really feels like the direct opposite of that entanglement we talked about earlier.
It is the great disentanglement. It's the undoing of that misidentification. And once this discernment becomes clearer, becomes more established through practice, the attention naturally begins to turn inward.
How so?
Well, instead of being constantly pulled outward, fascinated or disturbed by the changing contents, the thoughts, the world events, the emotions, attention starts to shift toward that which cannot be objectified, toward the awareness itself.
So, looking for the looker.
In a way, yes. You're turning attention towards the silent consciousness itself, that knowing presence that recognizes all states, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, but is itself beyond any particular state. You're looking for the awareness that is prior to every thought, every emotion, every sensation that arises within it.
Okay. And what's the payoff then for the listener? If someone really engages with this, what does it feel like when identity successfully makes that shift from the specific limited self-concept to this boundless awareness, this self?
The payoff described is, well, enormous. It's framed as a fundamental expansion of identity. When this truth isn't just understood intellectually, but is truly embodied, lived, identity expands beyond the narrow confines of form, role, and personal history.
So you don't stop being you in the world.
No, the functional self still operates, but the identification shifts. The individual ceases to feel like a separate, isolated someone who is constantly struggling for validation or trying to find meaning outside themselves. Instead, they start to experience themselves as the living expression of consciousness itself, aware, luminous, and inherently free, regardless of circumstances.
So it's a movement from feeling fragmented and needy to feeling whole and complete already.
Precisely. realizing that the self is the boundless field of awareness and the body and mind are just phenomena appearing within that field. That's the shift.
Okay. This theory, this understanding is beautiful, really profound, but it needs a practical framework to land it, right? And Section V seems to provide this, laying out 4 foundational questions. These seem designed to anchor the participant, the listener, in this new state of discernment and really drive the transformation process forward.
That's exactly their purpose. These 4 questions are designed to compel the individual to confront the specific source of their own personal confusion, and then apply that principle of viveka, the discernment we just discussed, directly to their own lived experience. It makes it personal.
Right. Takes it from the conceptual to the actual. Let's break down the first one. Question 1. What precisely constitutes the self? Now, this seems like we're repeating Section 2, but I guess it's applied differently here, as more of a personal challenge.
Exactly. It's applied as a direct challenge. It demands that the participant acknowledge, maybe consciously for the first time, that an identity must exist beyond the one that's just conferred by external factors.
So asking yourself, if you strip away your job title, your family roles, parent, child, spouse, your relationships, your possessions, even your location, what is actually left?
Yes. What remains when all the external labels and contexts are removed? It challenges you, the listener, to look past that circumstantial, constructed self and try to find, or at least sense, a deeper defining element that doesn't rely on the world outside for its existence. The aim is to really begin shattering the illusion that our external context is our internal essence.
Okay. And once we start genuinely probing that external definition, the confusion that often arises from that seems to lead naturally into the second question. What specifically hinders our self-awareness? Where do the blocks come from?
Right, and the material points immediately to these erroneous identifications, the mistaken identities that stem from past experiences. It's not just the raw memory of trauma or difficult events, but more importantly, the story we built around those events.
The narrative again.
The narrative again, how others treated us, the specific individual circumstances we were subjected to, the conclusions we drew about ourselves because of them. We take these past events and inadvertently use them as foundational building blocks for our current self-concept.
So the obstacle isn't necessarily the memory itself, but the underlying, often unconscious assumption that these past circumstantial factors solely define who we are right here, right now, in the present moment.
Precisely. We carry forward the label that was assigned perhaps by ourselves or others during that circumstance. I am unworthy because of X. I can't trust because of Y. While those experiences certainly shaped the lowercase self, mistaking that wounded or limited self for the totality of the capital S self, that is what creates the impediment to authentic being now. That identification with old pain and old narratives is the hindrance.
Okay, so moving beyond those hindrances, which can feel really heavy and ingrained, clearly requires active commitment. And that seems to be the focus of question 3. How do we move beyond hindrances to uncover our true selves?
Yes, and this question brings in the crucial concept of personal responsibility. The book is apparently quite unambiguous here. It states that it is the individual's sole duty to maintain the stability they've managed to establish in that witnessing awareness.
Solo duty, that's strong language.
It is. It implies this isn't a passive process or something that happens to you just once. It's framed as a constant, moment-to-moment commitment, a commitment to continually anchor oneself back into that place of steadiness, that observer perspective, and to strive for incremental, consistent improvement in doing so.
That really reframes the idea of transformation, doesn't it? It's not about waiting for some big flash of enlightenment or hoping for external grace to fix things.
Bro.
It's presented as an active, ongoing maintenance protocol, like tending a garden.
That's a great analogy.
Mm.
It is active maintenance. It's the conscious, continuous choice, moment by moment, to reside as the observer rather than getting sucked back into the reactive content, into the old story. This consistent maintenance of stability and steadiness is positioned as the core mechanism by which the individual actually lives the realization of the self, rather than just understanding it intellectually.
Living it, not just knowing it. Okay. And finally, the fourth question. This one seems to address a really common, often overlooked emotional hurdle in any kind of healing or transformation process. Why do we often discuss healing and yet struggle so much to let go? This question feels like it gets right to the heart of resistance.
It really does. The material suggests that the struggle to release persistent physical discomfort, emotional pain, or energetic blockages is often rooted in a very powerful though frequently subconscious belief. And that belief is the deep conviction that certain painful events or circumstances in our lives should not have transpired.
The "it shouldn't have happened" thought.
Exactly. That core belief, this was wrong, this shouldn't have been part of my story, creates a profound internal conflict. It sets up a resistance, a fight against reality as it actually occurred. We end up fighting the past, and that very fight is what maintains and perpetuates the suffering in the present moment.
Wow. So transformation isn't about somehow making the past go away or pretending it didn't happen, but about accepting that it did happen and, crucially, realizing that it doesn't have to limit the fundamental self now.
That acceptance is presented as the critical basis for any effective, lasting transformation. It means understanding on a deep level that the eternal self, the awareness, was fundamentally untouched by the event, even if the lowercase self, the personality, was deeply wounded by it. Understanding and ultimately accepting reality as it is not, as we desperately wish it had been, is what releases the enormous amount of energy currently trapped in that resistance, in that fight.
And that freed up energy then becomes available for actual healing and evolution.
Exactly. That's the idea. So these 4 questions together form a kind of practical roadmap. They translate the abstract philosophy about self and self-concept into concrete, actionable steps the listener can take toward genuine mastery.
That's a really helpful framework. Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive into the foundations of angeling, volume #1, has really shown us that the path they outline for this biopsycho-spiritual evolution is, well, highly structured. And its entire premise seems to rest on making one fundamental cognitive shift.
The critical synthesis, the core takeaway, is really about moving your primary sense of identity. It's that deliberate movement from identifying with the limited narrative-based lowercase self, the personality defined by roles, history,
Right.
and the need for external validation,
Right.
to identifying with the unconditioned witnessing, capitalized self, that internal subject that is aware of all the roles and stories but is never limited by them. That's the whole game, essentially.
And the importance of this inquiry, the shift for you, the listener, seems paramount because it fundamentally restructures your entire experience of worth and security, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shifts the very foundation of your existence from relying on external performance and validation, which are always changing, always precarious, to resting in internal recognition and stability, which the text argues are eternal and always available. That recognition, the material posits, is the direct and perhaps the only path to genuine inner freedom.
And it follows logically when you stop feeling confined by the ever-changing psychological narrative and you learn to consistently rest instead in that unchanging witness consciousness. Your entire experience of the world has to transform. Conflict, for example, which is almost always rooted in the ego needing to defend its story or its position. That conflict naturally begins to dissolve or at least lessen into more peaceful observation because the witness has nothing to defend.
It has nothing invested in the story being right. Okay. So, drawing this to a close, here is our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry forward, to mull over as you integrate this deep dive. If the self is truly not the content, not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the body, not the story, but is instead the field of awareness in which the mind and body simply appear, what is the practical daily consequence of recognizing, even for a moment, that you are the space and not the content within the space? How does that recognition right now fundamentally change your engagement with, say, the next challenging conversation you have, or the next difficult emotion, or the next overwhelming thought that arises?
Yeah, did you consider the immediate difference in psychological leverage you gain? Compare saying, I am stressed, which completely fuses your identity with the temporary state of stress.
Right, I stress.
Exactly. Compare that to recognizing, I am the awareness that is observing the arising sensation of stress within me. That simple shift in identification from being the content to being the container, that is the true leverage point for all self-mastery, according to this framework.
A powerful place to leave it. We sincerely hope this deep dive into the foundations of Angel Wing serves as a valuable map, or at least offers some useful signposts on your own journey toward mastery and evolution.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.